reaffirm the resolution. First is framing. Prioritize structural violence. The traditional risk calculus is racism fails to address structural violence. Winter late 99, right? The direct violence is horrific, but its brutality gets our attention. We notice and respond to it. Structural violence is invisible, embedded in ubiquitous social structures and seemingly ordinary. Cognitive processes divide people into in-groups and out-groups. Those outside lie outside our scope of justice. We must be vigilant in noticing oppressed, invisible outsiders. Thus, we must flip our decision calculus to prioritize those out-groups. Virgic 96 finds that policymakers should look to society's most vulnerable. Fear of catastrophes leads policymakers to battle dramatic but statistically less threatening hazards while accepting more harmful but more mundane hazards. Thus, systems premised on racism cannot be justified and must be rejected in every instance. Many 2000 writes that one cannot be indulgent towards racism. To accept the racist to the slightest degree is to endorse injustice and violence. Moral conduct emerges from a choice. One has to want it. One cannot found a legislative order on racism because racism signifies the exclusion of the other and subjection to violence and domination. Thus, our sole contention is an American nightmare. College education once promised equity and opportunity to Black and brown Americans. Taylor 22 writes that for decades, the college degree has been marketed to Black Americans as a way to escape the cycle of poverty, all but automatically conferring the skills and connections to achieve the American dream. But as Perry 21 writes, the Black-white wage gap is getting worse while Black communities' indebtedness is increasing. Thus, Brooks 21 reports that this is the latest iteration in a long and shameful history of promises to Black and brown communities. Instead, all that has been delivered is a newly and cleverly packaged form of the same oppression dominant for centuries prior. Brooks 21 writes that historically, students benefited from public investment in higher education. By the end of the 20th century, just as Black and brown students gained entry after decades-long legal battles, policymakers shifted the significant costs of higher education from the public to individual families. This shift has reinforced subjugation. Brooks continues that Black families are more likely to borrow more, and to have trouble in repayment. Actar 20 writes that Black students are 5 times as likely to default on their loans than their white peers, and this inequality builds over time. Brooks concludes that 2 decades after taking out their student loans, the median Black borrower still owes 95% of their debt, where the median white borrower has paid off 94%. The result is intergenerational damage. Taylor 22 finds that Black borrowers are more likely to miss payments and default, which can make it difficult to secure housing, jobs, and risks having money seized from Social Security. And Perry finds that regardless of income after graduation, Black households carry more debt, which pushes down their creditworthiness. As a result, Black people with a college degree have lower home ownership rates than white high school dropouts, culminating in what Right 23 calls a debt trap for Black borrowers. This takes place to the extent that Black students may end up worse off than having not gone to college at all, as Taylor writes that pursuing higher education can actually negatively impact Black families' wealth due to the burden of student loan debt. Overall, Brooks 21 finds that we are perpetuating the legacy of redlining by requiring these same Black families historically denied wealth to take on this debt burden. In such a time, the words of Malcolm X have never rang truer. I don't see an American dream, I see an American nightmare. Moreover, this has enabled racist exploitation. Broder 22 explains that the military intentionally utilizes the student debt crisis to target Black students. Indeed, Platt 20 writes that the student debt crisis disproportionately affects people of color. Not coincidentally, Black women are heavily overrepresented in the military, seen as disposable and easy to recruit. Specifically, subjecting a race of people to the violence of enlistment for the sake of U.S. interests is devastating, especially for college-age students. UN 22 writes that the highest rates of all disorders in the U.S. military, including alcohol abuse, anxiety syndromes, depression, and PTSD, have been found among the military's youngest cohort. Soldiers who enlisted before the age of 25 were 7 times more likely to develop PTSD. Eroding this exploitation is critical. Mitchell 22 finds that by forgiving loans, you're removing the leverage the Department of Defense maintained. And debt forgiveness is thus imperative. Actor 20 writes that white households have 12 times the wealth on average of Black households. Eliminating student debt shrinks it to just 5 times. And Right 23 concludes that achieving racial justice requires eliminating the racial wealth gap, and student debt forgiveness is a necessary step in that direction.
Just for clarification, we didn't read the Duval reference. The Duval reference, it's just not right.
Reading a seamless court filings are down over the past year. Circular 22, the judiciary released new data showing huge drops in filings across the court system. The theme was a major slump across every part of the federal judiciary. Across all districts, filings dropped 27%, affirming would spark a plethora of court filings at multiple levels for multiple reasons. Numerous critics held Hosky 23, debt relief has landed in America's highest court. Justice peppered questions about legal standing, the merits of the cases, and fairness. Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and South Carolina jointly claimed combined debt relief would harm revenue in states and finances of loan agencies. Fifth Circuit doubles down against Biden's plan. Supreme Court denies injunction in Wisconsin states. The catalyst to file a lawsuit in Kansas. Forgiveness would also be viewed as unconstitutional. Lotus 23, NCLA filed a lawsuit against the new relief plan. NCLA is arguing the plan violates the Constitution's appropriations clause. The court law collapses effective government's trust, innovation, and frivolous litigation. Deloitte 19, backlog to reduce investment in innovation courts, deter investment by increasing increasing risk and enabling anti-competitive behavior, violating agreements with impunity, reduce citizen satisfaction, confidence in government, trust is at historical lows. Administrative integrity is an impact filter, otherwise extinction. Call year 21. We live in a vulnerable world. Disease, financial accidents, attacks on systems, vulnerability of systems on which life depends on administrative devices to mitigate vulnerability. These laid our strategy of preparedness with disasters, terror attacks. They drew an expert coordination, planning across agencies, systems required to sustain life from nuclear attack, administrative readiness, a vast range of functions, welfare, econ, industrial process, admin state. C2 is a moral hazard. Affirming encourages reckless borrowing. Well trained to forgiving all student debt will send an implicit message to borrowers when debt gets too high, the government will value out. Students will borrow more and pay off loans more slowly, if at all. Indeed, CRP 22, the total amount of federal loan debt will return to its current level in 2028 if all loans are canceled, and it'll greenlight tuition rates. Mikulski 22, cancellation add fuel to the college tuition skyrocket, enabling colleges to raise prices for every dollar increase in subsidized student loans. Colleges raise prices 60 cents. That irrational fiscal behavior underlies recession. Wall 22, moral hazard caused questionable choices. Large financial institutions made risky investments in the run-up to the financial crisis on the assumption that the government would bail them out. Indeed, Dow 1000, moral hazard at the level of the individual and the overall financial system can cause a large shock. Specifically, it will cause bond spirals. George 22, cancellation wouldn't erase student debt, but rather shift the liability to the government's balance sheets for investors in treasury securities. Cancellation therefore leads to a sudden decline in revenues and sustained inflation. That tax investor confidence is usually 23, whereas the volatility inflation injects in uncertainty. Profit and growth margins may be hit, affecting investor confidence, which in turn affects their willingness to hold stocks independently. Lee 20, billions worth of student loans are sold as student loan asset-backed securities to the biggest investors. Slabs could pose a systemic risk. It'll be the Big Short all over again. Harmon 21, like the 2008 mortgage bubble. Canceling student loan debt would end regular interest payments to slabs investors with no recourse. Could trigger downturn by instantly wiping out a growing market. That's devastating. Good night 22. Forecasts imply that even a moderate negative shock could push the global economy into a recession. Beyond the markets, last R21, the link between financial crises and deterioration in security has been highlighted. The next economic crisis could cause a global conflict and new world war. C3 is populism. Global populist sentiments at all-time lows. Robinson 22, pandemic showed decline in popularity of populists as scientific denialism and early mismanagement undermined legitimacy in the West. Staples of populist discourse like anti-immigration faded into the background as the nation shut down. Populist factors made for a potent anti-populist surge. 2023 is the last nail in the coffin. Winter 23, number of populist leaders has fallen to a 20-year low, and number of people living under populist rule has fallen by 800 million in 2 years. 2023 could be decisive. Debt relief would predominantly help already rich borrowers. The analysts warning full student loan forgiveness is regressive. Households in the top 30% of earnings receive half of all dollars forgiven. That reinvigorates a dying movement. Involving 22 easing student loans would paint Democrats as the party of the elite. Emotional populism is about creating anger at the elite. Look at all those liberals giving handouts to entitled college-educated punks with their Instagram and avocado toast. You borrowed money. If it created debt, then too bad. Rhetoric is saturated with class-based appeals to resentment, but substantive proposals are incredibly thin. It'll spill over globally. Gutierrez 19, domestic populism as an anti-establishment movement spills over into the global arena and the Western global order. Populism is devastating. Void 21. Populist politics undermine ability to prevent experts. Psychological and economic biasing is preventing extinction is exacerbated. Populists have little respect for experts and scholars. Climate change, nuclear war, AI, and pandemics have bad nuclear scenarios lead to winter and agriculture failure. As populists center for destabilization, that creates a new, more severe form of structural violence. For Tonsi 20, the rise of populism is the present normalization of xenophobia, nativism, and racism in societies will form a new normal which will entrench and extend the reach of racism even further.
I'm good for cross review.
Any first question?
Yeah.
Can you explain the impact of this stuff on your team?
C1?
Yeah.
It's basically talking about when we have one of these court backlogs, then things like administrative agencies, like government agencies, can't like do their work to prevent existential risks.
Like how, what existential risks?
Like, let's say, for example, like the EPA, right? If we have court laws and huge amount of backlogs, stuff you have in front of government, they can do things like climate change policy, etc. Climate change, other government agency, and all the rest that they do.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah.
Let's talk about the framing. Okay, you say that traditional risks, actually no, a priori, right? Let's look at the MEMI evidence. What does it actually say beyond the tag?
What do you mean? It says that we can't excuse like racist structures.
I know, but why is it a priori question? Like, why can't we evaluate anything else like beyond this?
Because it's structure, right? Like for like a really understandable like analogy, I think it'd be like it doesn't matter if you prove that there are consequences. There's consequences to getting rid of the system as long as the system itself is bad. For example, it would be like we should, for example, integrate schools even if there's a lot of backlash to integrating schools because the like structure of segregation itself is racist.
Just a follow-up, right? What is the the system that you are rejecting? Is it like the federal government and the lives of Black Americans on the government?
No, it's student loan debt. So our argument is that for the 40 million people who remove
Perfect.
this structural barrier.
So when you affirm, do no Black Americans have student loan debt? Are they completely absolved of like any connection to it?
No, in the future, obviously people will have student loan debt, but that's not offense or defense because that doesn't change between worlds. But our argument is that right now there's 40 million people who have this student loan debt. It's disproportionately bad for Black and brown Americans, and that's something we can reduce with the.
I'm not saying it's offense or defense. You say that it's a priority, i.e. this reliance must be rejected in every instance. If in the neg world they're still gonna have this reliance, then like wouldn't it be non-unique or you should reject the neg world too? I.e. there's larger structural inequities that are gonna change whether if you
our argument is that the structural nature of the barrier student loan debt represents isn't just from whether it exists within our society. For example, if we're able to get rid of that structural barrier for those 40 million people, that's still offense for us. But sure. Yeah. Can you explain like the link about balance sheets on your C2?
On the C2?
Yeah.
Yeah, basically the George evidence says that rather than just erasing the debt, right, that money has to come from somewhere.
Sure.
Specifically, you go on the federal government's balance sheets, i.e. like the Treasury Department would have like some more bonds, etc., which would hurt those investors.
Wait, why does it decrease investor confidence?
Because it causes inflation. That's not true.
Wait, why does it cause inflation?
Because you have to sell bonds.
Okay.
Treasury securities.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Why does you do the evidence just says it spills over without warning? Why does it spill over?
Because a lot of countries model the U.S. in terms of political behavior, i.e. after we saw like Trump, for example, in 2020, a lot of other like populist or like right-leaning candidates got located elsewhere, i.e. we'd argue that the U.S. is the linchpin.
That's probably not a lie. Okay.
On their first petition about court plug, first court plug is already up. Track 23 finds that 2023 civil filings are up 23.3%. Civil filings for 2023 are higher than they were 5 years ago, up 9.5%. 2, the resolution says the U.S. federal government, which is all three branches, will forgive student debt, meaning it fiats the Supreme Court forgives, so it cannot be constitutionally challenged. 3, Congress would have to pass the act. The executive doesn't have the power to. Black 23 finds that the executive administers and enforces legislation. The executive can forgive debts only when Congress authorizes it. All of their evidence and the precedent they use is about challenging executive action, but if Congress passes it themselves, there's no ground for the Supreme Court to block it. 4th, there are different courts from what their internal link and linked evidence is talking about. Constitutional challenges go through the appellate and Supreme Court systems, whereas patent disputes, which is what their innovation impact is about, go through business and specialized patent courts. But 5th, there's no impact. Their evidence just lists a bunch of massive crises, but there is absolutely no warranting in their case why administrative integrity solves for a litany of existential risks. It just lists them, but it never says why administrative integrity actually solves for them. Don't let them read new warrants in their next speech. On their second contention about moral hazard, number 1, Edelman 23 finds that there's no evidence of a moral hazard because students who can borrow more often still prefer to borrow as little as possible. Think about this logically. No one is going to drive themselves into financial ruin off the idea that the government will forgive their loans in the future, especially in the context of America's political instability. We have new administrations every 4 years. There is no way Americans will expect that Biden, who's likely to be out of office in a few years, will pay for their student loans and just throw their arms up and get enormous amounts of debt. But second, statistical data disproves their argument. Hitzig 22 finds there is no evidence that people would go out and spend that money. Evidence from the past 2 years of debt forbearance shows that borrowers use the money to pay off debt and save. 3rd, colleges wouldn't increase tuition even if demand increases. Edelman 23 finds that research has found that even when students are able to borrow large amounts, it doesn't lead to increases in tuition for 3 reasons. A, Edelman finds that colleges are not profit-maximizing firms, demonstrated by the fact that institutions of higher ed are moving towards no-loan programs. B, schools don't want to be perceived as greedy. And C, colleges are concerned that if they raise prices, they won't get students. But 4th, alternative causes led tuition to rise, not loan forgiveness. Edelman furthers that there are alternative explanations for why college costs have risen so much. State funding declined, and students have come to expect more non-academic services. A few reasons this matters. A, it means their evidence linking student loan forgiveness and tuition increases is false correlation. But B, it means their argument is not unique. If colleges are going to increase prices, they'll do so anyway. Then 5th, there's no impact. Student loan forgiveness is not large enough to cause a recession. Samurai 23 finds that according to the Fed, student loan debt accounted for only roughly 11% of total debt, not large enough to cause a significant slowdown in GDP. On their third contention. First, populism is rising. Galston 22 explains that widespread discontent with the status quo presents an opportunity for populist politicians to trace surges of crime and drugs to unchecked immigration and lax law enforcement by previous governments. Republicans hope to ride victory this November on trends similar to European populists. The GOP holds a huge advantage over Democrats on crime. Post dates their evidence is from April. It says populism decreased because of closed borders for COVID, but again, COVID borders have been open now, which means per their own evidence, populism is already going to increase, so it's not unique. Second, their evidence, which about Republican attacks being rich with populist rhetoric never proves it's actually enough to sway public perception towards populism. For two reasons it won't. A, incumbents usually win in their primaries anyway due to funding advantages, so new populists likely won't make their way onto the ballot. And two, people keep voting along party lines regardless of the candidate. As Cummings 20 finds, only a small fraction of U.S. voters will sacrifice their partisan interests and vote for a third-party candidate, which means populists won't be able to win and won't be swayed. Cut the card there. Then third, there's no clarity on how many populists get elected, what positions they take control over, and how they leverage those positions to break through checks and balances. A, checks and balances likely limit their legislative power, ability to wage war, reverse climate actions, etc. That's why their duty era evidence sets Trump as a past populist leader, yet none of the existential risks they talk about manifested. But fourth, their warranting for why populism increases existential risks is about authoritarianism, i.e. them not being accountable, but they read no evidence why U.S. democracy would decline. And again, their evidence is just laundry listing crises, but they don't explain how they actually solve them.
We're not going for the argument on core clock. First, go for the argument on moral hazard. Group all of their responses. They conceded the Grunder link, which explains that when we do this massive amount of debt, it would increase Treasury securities. This would lead to a sudden decline in revenues and sustained inflation, which means independent of all of their responses, you're going to see a massive economic shock. The net evidence explains that forefronts imply even a moderate negative shock could push the global economy into recession. The larger evidence explains the link between financial crisis and deterioration of security has been highlighted. They've literally ignored a link into extinction. The round is over immediately. On their argument specifically, they say that people won't borrow, but their Edelman evidence is in the context of borrowing large amounts. Our evidence is more specific to universal debt cancellation. They talk about statistical data that people don't borrow the money, but once again, this evidence is not in the form of debt cancellation. It's in the form of just borrowing more money. Then they say that colleges won't want to do it. The problem is Edelman is not in the context of universal debt cancellation. Rather, our evidence explains empirically, and it isolates the correlation and independently isolates it. For every $1 increase in student loan forgiveness, i.e. subsidized loans, you get a 60-cent increase in tuition increase in colleges. They say those alternate causes, and colleges are profit greedy, profit maximizing, greedy, etc. Group this response. Recognize the fact that colleges are increasing tuition right now means that they will do it regardless. Rather, you give them a green light to increase further tuition even more. So even if there's alternative causes, this adds on to that effect. But when here is simple, this impacts out to all future students, whereas they only impact to one generation. We're not going for populism. Go to their case. First, framing. Extinction is irreversible, includes any transfer, anything to improve, and help outgroups to solve their oppression. Second, body count is the most objective method of impact calculus, and comparing suffering between outgroups is unethical. Then, Farquhar 17 explains the most underrepresented in policymaking spheres is the future generations, and by reducing existential risk, we solve. Specifically, existential risk reduction is underinvested into the intergenerational public good. Most of the benefits are enjoyed by future generations who have no say in the political process. The current generation enjoys the benefits in the national, while the future generations bear the cost. Let's go down their evidence. A lot of their evidence is power tag. They read 2 sentence tags and then have 5 words highlighting. This is an independent reason to drop them because it literally means they can say whatever they want in their tag. Their evidence is not corroborated that at all. On the evidence, first, the winter evidence explains that violence is slow and small, which means don't let them make new warrants as to why it outweighs our case. Second, the Burchick evidence is sport on, apathetic to race. Number 2, the piece of evidence is power tag because it says that you're just overlooking some perspective. Our argument is that their perspective, if you focus on structural violence, you're overlooking the macroeconomic scale. So it's not racist because some perspective would have been neglected eventually. And the Farquhar evidence explains specifically that if you focus on structural violence, you're ignoring underrepresented people within future generations, which means this will always happen. Then, on the MEMI evidence, this, number 1, you are working within the system. They say reject the system a priori. You're literally working within the system. Second, it's inevitable because marginal perspectives are ignored. And 3, the evidence is super power tagged. It doesn't say the word regret or that it's the prior question in the first place. I've already explained why some perspective will always be ignored, which means that system will never be perfect, so you can't reject it on pace. First, term of forgiveness increases debt. CRP 22 writes, canceling all federal student debt would cost $1.6 trillion. This has 2 implications. First, tax rates increase. McManus explains the surge in debt levels forces policymakers to increase cap revenues. This always on scope because it affects the income of every minority. They only help those with loans. Second is the economy. Houston 23, issuing large amounts of that direct private investment in the private sector and decrease. And this is our case link, which is completely conceded. This impacts out to every minority. Then, we're solving right now. White House 22 explains the Biden administration estimates that over $20 million could solve for the state plan. The benefits of the state plan would be critical for low and middle income borrowers. But Bomb 21 continues, beneficiaries of universal student loan forgiveness would be higher income, better educated, and white. Among those making payments on loans, 4% of those fund poverty, which means they worsen inequality from the status quo. Then it's a trade-off. Bomb 21 explains that modest student loan forgiveness programs are staggeringly expensive, and federal spending that could use other advanced goals. These sums involve exceed cumulative spending on the nation's major anti-poverty programs. Cut the card there. Internal link to the economy preventing poverty. USA 21, the events clause would drive federal resources for anti-poverty programs of $1 trillion to do poverty with by reducing it, but 50%, the earned income tax credit, housing vouchers, and the PB 23 evidence explains policies that for student Fed have a net fiscal multiplier of 0.1%. Most legislation is 0.9%, so it's 9 times more effective than other legislation.
Okay. Very moral hazard. You're arguing that student loan forgiveness will, in some form, cause a recession, correct?
Yeah, there's 3 links. You addressed 2 of them.
Yeah.
The responses to those 2 are good, and you forgot.
The issue is the samurai evidence is impact defense on the recession impact, and it's conceded that according to federal data, because student loan forgiveness is only 11% of overall debt, it's not large enough to cause a recession.
Yeah,
which means
so
you don't have a link into it.
The impact that we read specifically is because the economy is so vulnerable right now.
Yeah.
Even a modest shock would trigger the impact.
The problem
so
is,
the problem is, wait, real quick.
This wasn't in your rebuttal, number one.
Yes,
which means
it
it's
was in my
no,
rebuttal. It was in case. I read this very specific.
You said
I
the
can show you
argument.
that.
The problem is you said the argument was conceded, but it wasn't conceded, and the response that didn't get addressed is the samurai evidence. You can't come up
You
here and
can't just
try to
read
cross
evidence
apply.
and like say it doesn't apply to our case when I've sent
Right.
you the cards, I've sent you the
Yeah.
rhetoric. It
My
was
point
there
is,
from
my
the
point is,
start.
it's a conceded response, and now you're reaching into your case evidence to try to act like it was frontline. You can have a question.
So 2 things. First, I said it in rebuttal. Second, it was in case. Third,
Wait, no, you said it was
11%.
conceded,
Wait,
and then you said
11% of like GDP is like huge. Like I don't understand why that's small.
I mean, our evidence says it's not sufficient to cause an economic.
Yeah, but
It's
our evidence
fine,
is
it's
only a
done.
moderate amount.
Yeah,
okay,
but
explain
my
to me.
argument is that it won't
Detached
be
from your
moderate.
detached from your evidence, you explain to me why 11% is a small number.
Yeah, it's because in the context of the overall economy, 11% is in the context of relative to the other 89%. Our evidence says.
Wait, so you just said 100% minus 11% is 89%. Explain why 11% of a $20 trillion economy is small.
My point is that our evidence isolates that it is not a large enough amount to cause a recession, and that's just not addressed. But you can have a question. We've been on this for like a minute and a half.
Okay, let's go to your framing.
Okay.
Can you read the part of the Virchik evidence that says the tag that you wrote it?
Yeah, the Virchik evidence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Alex, can you pass me my computer? Thanks. The Virchik evidence is excellent. It says that policymakers always focus on catastrophic impacts and that they don't address society's most vulnerable.
So what
our
is the tag that you
Our
have?
tag is that they always address the catastrophic impacts. I can read the exact tag. if
Okay,
you want.
yeah, go to your tag.
Yeah, hold on, let me pull it. The Virchik evidence says, well, this isn't a tag. This is our
No,
argument
like
about
what
how we
you
must
sent
flip
in the
our
email
assumptions.
Like, go to what you sent.
Okay, I can go to what I sent in the email. Yeah.
Yeah.
Our argument is that traditional risk calculus doesn't focus on society's most
And it
vulnerable.
said traditional risk calculus is racist.
Yeah.
So explain what part of that is
The evidence says fear of catastrophes leads policymakers to battle dramatic but statistically less threatening hazards
Why is
while
that?
accepting while accepting more harmful but more mundane hazards, and that policymakers should instead look to society's most vulnerable.
Why
And I
is
have
that
a question.
racist?
I mean, our argument is that traditional risk
Like, you're just
calculus-
adding in words
The
that your
point
evidence
is-
doesn't say.
The point is, could I have a follow-up? When you talk about our winter evidence, does it say that structural violence is small?
That's the implication I made.
Okay, the evidence doesn't say that.
Well, your evidence doesn't say that.
Okay. It'll start on the framing. Our case. Cool. On framing, we're going for the many evidence that the system's premise on racism is to be rejected in every system because to accept racism to the slightest degree is to endorse injustice and violence. It signifies the exclusion of the other and subjection to violence and domination. This takes on all their extinction responses because our argument is it doesn't matter what sorts of harms you prove is insofar as you have to prioritize taking out the structure first. They say that we should lose for power tagging. I would say that this is literally just checked back by them reading their cards. So if they're losing this argument, we probably shouldn't lose for that. But on the memory responses specifically, number one, they say that we are operating in the system. They can see the Brooks evidence that the very inception of student loan debt is the structurally racist thing that we're talking about, which means that we're tearing down part of the system. Second, they say there's marginal perspectives, but our argument is that it's an iterative process. As you continue to reevaluate structures, you can solve for these marginal perspectives. Third, they say that it doesn't say it's an a priori question. Our argument is that you have to look at the structures first, even if it doesn't say a priori. Our analysis is conceded. We're going for American nightmare. Student loan debt is our generation's redlining. A debt trap meant to control communities of color. Black Americans are 5 times more likely to default than 20 years after graduating. The average black borrower still has 95% of their debt remaining. The average white borrower has nearly paid it off. The result is an inability to get jobs, purchase homes, or build wealth for black communities. Forgiveness is critical, decreasing the black-white wealth gap by several times. And while it won't solve racial injustice in America, our right evidence concludes that it is a necessary and critical step on their responses. Number one, first on things being solved, on SAFE program solving. Note 23 finds that SAFE has long wait times, errors with bills, and lost account information and denied relief with devastating impacts on household finances. Yet borrowers still have trouble benefiting from SAFE. There are problems affecting hundreds of thousands of borrowers due to flawed data, and it won't get better. It's structural. Chevy 23 concludes, there's no easy way to improve the system. It's about to get worse. Servicers don't have the funding to better serve technology. It may not be better serve technology may not be up to the task. On to group all of their taxes turn. Taxes would never be raised. Source 23 writes that raise taxes with a split Congress is unlikely to happen, and we wouldn't need to panic over budget deficits. And their spending turn is covered by the samurai evidence I'll talk about in their case. Then it helps the rich. Affirming helps those who need it most. Energy 21 finds that cancellation would benefit those who need it most. Student debt as a share of income is higher for lower income borrowers. Low income borrowers have benefited immensely from debt cancellation. Indeed, Southlake 22 finds that the student debt burden falls much heavier on low income borrowers, and the affluent canceling debt would be a greater boon to low income borrowers than rich. It only matters how much they're burdened, not actually how many dollars they're getting. Then on trade-off. Welfare would never be slashed. Source 23, he slashes spending on social programs with the split Congress is unlikely to happen. We needn't panic over budget deficits. Let's go to their argument about moral hazard. The samurai evidence, which is completely conceded in their last speech, means that they cannot go for the link about, or actually, they can't go for this argument at all. It says specifically that the share of student loans of the economy is not enough to cause a recession. They're going to come up here and say that the economy is fragile right now, but the evidence literally says specifically that the percentage may seem large, but it is not enough to cause a recession. That's terminal defense on their case. But on tuition increase, the Edelman evidence finds evidence finds that because students spend responsibly, this means that it's not going to increase tuition because then there's no will to pay for the tuition. They say that all of our evidence is not about student loan debt. No, the title of the article is analyzing the impacts of student loan debt on whether tuition will go up, and none of their stuff is specific to it either. It's also about subsidies.
Extend our argument on moral hazard. We're going to Wall Street after cancellation. Students will borrow more recklessly, and the CRFB evidence says that student debt will skyrocket up, and in colleges, the McCulsey evidence says that for every dollar in cancellation, tuition increases 60 cents. Specifically, the link, not the impact on bond spots, was conceded out of rebuttal. Further, Georgia evidence cancellation would shift liability to the government, which decreases revenues for investors in bonds, increasing inflation, which is bad because the Juji evidence says that investors will sell off the stocks. The Gwinnett evidence frontlines their impact defense says that even a moderate negative shock due to global instability and weakness in the economic system will cause a recession. And Lazaro evidence says that resulting war causes extinction. To give you two responses. One is the Edelman evidence, and they say that it's talking about student loan debt. No, it says that, quote, when people borrow a large amount, not our argument that, which is saying that the government pays for the tuition, which is what happens when you have cancellation. Even then, they can see that $1 in cancellation leads to 0.6 cents, $0.6 of increase in tuition. Our evidence is much more specific on questions than the Edelman evidence. Even then, they say it's only 11% of GDP. One, that's not responsive to our internal link. We're talking about inflation, not the percentage of GDP. So even if investors have the perception that inflation is increasing and they're going to sell off the bonds, this impact defense doesn't take it out. Also, the evidence that Nikhil frontline in rebuttal literally says that even a small shock, so even if it is 11%, and even if their evidence says that small, it will still cause our impact to trigger. It's mishandled. We're definitely getting offense here and extinction here. Go to their case. The worst part here, or the most biggest implication here, is that they have conceded the far cry evidence, which says that future generations that cannot be seen or follow the most underrepresented. This gives us infinite scope under their own framework, regardless of if you want to vote for structural violence. Underrepresenting the voice of future generations in policymaking is a form of structural violence, meaning that by stopping extinction, we are solving for all future generations of structural violence, outweighing their impacts under their own framing by a wide margin. Is conceded in the last piece. Don't get the new responses to it. Even then, we're gonna go for some terms. Specifically, we'll go for the trade-off trend. They can see that these current social programs and welfare programs are 9 times more effective than cancellation that actually solves these minorities' issues. Their only response is the same frontlines earlier, saying that Congress is split right now and that they won't cut it. But our argument is that because we need political capital and compromise to pass something so big as the app and to pass cancellation, etc., and because social welfare programs, further our own arguments about Republicans are always on the chopping block, that when you have to spend so much money to do the app, you're definitely going to cut it off, even that it's a risk of offense. If there's even a chance that these programs are going to be cut when you affirm, you definitely vote for us to prevent that because they've conceded that they are 9 times more effective. Then let's go to the MEMI evidence. First of all, the CRFP evidence from our case says that student debt will skyrocket back by 2028, even if you affirm, meaning that they are still going to be working under those same structures, meaning that it's not a priority. Even then, don't look. They say that the evidence says that to look at structures first, but read the evidence. It doesn't say that. It's still just their analysis. It just says that racist structures are bad. We're saying that you can both look. One, that the that the app is still working under the systems, and two, that we can still look at different structures and look at small groups and larger impacts at the same time. The evidence is really power tag. It doesn't say that as a prerequisite or any sort of analysis like that. That's just their own interpretation of it. They've conceded to parole free riding, which is huge under their framing, and our case in this handle. We're winning.
Good for Grant.
Yes. You have a lot of insofar as you don't extend an internal link into your attack. You don't extend an internal link into your extinction. You say, quote, your direct quote in your extension is, economic decline causes extinction, go to their case.
Yeah,
because you don't explain how economic decline causes.
recession would cause war, like it's implicit.
Yeah. Wait.
Well, you didn't say cause of war, and no internal link reward extinction.
Like same for your case, you
Yeah,
can
wait.
extend your impact, like I.
Wait, we did, wait.
Our impact is well in there.
Our impact is.
Yeah,
well-
it is a-
Yeah,
he did.
I can read out.
I can read you.
Also, given that you did not contest the fact that the economy caused war, etc., there's no reason why interlink
No, there is. You're
If you also want to talk about listeners, like your response to trade-off was like 5 seconds, so like there's overness everywhere.
Wait, first of all, it's not overtime. It didn't before I got to your case. And secondly, like, I just read a piece of evidence. I read out the whole piece of evidence, which is like the entire argument that we're making, whereas you didn't extend your argument in your last speech, pretty much.
Okay, we say there's probably a lower, like,
No, I think there's a-
threshold for the
I
interlink,
think
doesn't
judges
mean that
should-
you conceded.
I think judges should not vote on arguments that are not extended, and you
They
didn't
were
extend
extended.
them.
Said the economy caused the resulting.
Yeah, you said, no,
You said economic decline causes extinction.
That was.
No, I said the resulting.
This is like.
Even if you said it for the resulting war.
I'm looking at the extension right now.
There's no warrant on the internal link for why that's true. I can't just get up and be like, their case doesn't happen, and then if you can see that.
Yeah, but that's not the same thing because you conceded that part of the argument.
Yeah.
So
You
you
can
conceded
see that our case doesn't happen.
Like for example, if I was first grade, if your entire argument was conceded, you can extend it like how you want to. Our argument is that we
No,
did
you
extend
have to
it.
extend
It
the
doesn't
part.
have to have like the minutia of the like very technical.
I mean, that
There's
allows
not a
you to
huge
just.
gap between our interlink extension and yours. We say sufficient.
You didn't have an internal link extension.
Wait,
It's fine,
you
you
said
have
the two links, the internal link was the economic.
Okay, explain to me how student loan, like tuition going up or debt balance sheets causes extinction. So let's see like how much of that was in summary.
Because there's increasing inflation and because the
Yeah, but I was wrong.
and they will solve all the stocks, but as well, that evidence says that because it's building that causes a recession, and then the last round of evidence says that recession needs to go.
Yeah, but you don't
Why
explain
does
why
that
that is
is
equal.
equal?
There's no.
Conceded.
wait.
It's conceded
Yeah, the
argument.
problem
There's a low
is,
threshold for
even if, for example, like you conceded the samurai evidence, I can't just get up and be like.
I know, I frontline that.
They conceded this. Yeah,
No,
you
I
frontlined it brand new
I'll
in some,
find out
like,
like 3 times though.
Yeah.
in brand new in some.
Said it's not responsive.
Like it's not responsive to the argument.
And
I mean,
they feel extended to like impacts.
I see the broader point is that.
But also, like, how does this evidence matter? You yourself
Yeah, I
can't explain
understand
it.
that.
Like copy paste.
Because every single judge's paradigm, I'm pretty sure every judge on this panel says that in order to vote off an argument, it has to be extended in summary, and your internal link was not extended in summary, and no warranting was
Because that
extended.
literally spent like 40 seconds extending the argument in summary.
Yeah, but there's also running the claim.
And it's an argument that you conceded initially.
It was like, it was a low threshold. It was only go for last.
Like, it's just
I think we will go for, vote off something that wasn't.
We have like a minute, I think, or is it maybe less?
We have 51 seconds, starting now. This will be framing our case. And then their case. Is everyone ready? This round is simple. The MEMI evidence that systems premised on racism must be rejected in every instance because to accept racism to the slightest degree is to endorse injustice is conceded. They've dropped that it signifies the exclusion of the other and subjection to violence and domination, unless you cannot justify systems that are designed to be racist. Moreover, they've conceded the Brooks evidence from our case that literally student loans are designed to be racist, which means you don't evaluate their benefits and harms because you cannot justify a racist system, just like you cannot justify, for example, segregation by saying that there would be backlash if you desegregated. Our argument is that you need to tear down the structure at its core. At the end of this round, they have 3 responses. First, they say extinction outweighs, but they completely misunderstand our argument. Their extinction outweighs argument assumes that you evaluate the consequences, but our entire argument is that you need to evaluate racist structures first and always reject them, which is conceded. Second, they see the MEMI evidence. Does it say what we say it says? Yes, it does. It says that you must reject racism and that you cannot found a policy on it. It says that word for word. Third, they say that there will still be debt in the future, but if we can break down barriers and remove these structural barriers for an entire generation, which is a conceded argument in our case, which means we are breaking breaking down these structures. At that point, if we win our case, we win the round. Extended. Student loan debt is our generation's redlining, a debt trap meant to control communities of color. Black Americans are 5 times more likely to default. In 20 years after graduating, the average black borrower still has 95% of their debt. The result is an inability to get jobs, purchase homes, or build wealth. Forgiveness is critical, decreasing the black-white wealth gap by several times, and while it won't solve all racial injustice, our right evidence concludes that it is a necessary and critical step. On our case, they extend one response, and it's through ink. They just say that it would trade off with welfare programs, but they've continued SOAR evidence that cutting welfare programs is politically unpopular, so it would never happen. They say you need political capital in order to pass the act, but again, it would harm political capital to cut welfare programs because it's unpopular to cut them, which means they would never cut them for the warranting any SOAR evidence, so they have no responses to our case. Go to their case. Number one, you cannot vote for them on an argument that was not extended in their speech. They extended no warrant for why economic decline causes extinction. That they literally said the word economic decline causes extinction, they didn't extend a warrant for it. This is public forum debate. You cannot win on an argument that was not in your summary. But second, they have conceded the Edelman evidence that overall, because people don't increase their spending, tuition can't increase, and the Samurai evidence that there would be no recession as a result of student loans. It's very, very clean for the app.
Okay. Take a lot of order is going to be my case, their case, and on their case I'll do the frame. So everyone's good. While my opponents want a last-ditch attempt, you're not voting off of blue key finals on a technicality. When they've power-tagged their evidence, they have not yet a warrant as to why this is a necessary and first step. Neither team, like, if it's an implicitly conceded argument, you don't get a warrant. Remember what we tell you specifically, that war causes economic decline, which causes extinction. That was all conceded. You should have a lower threshold of extending that, especially when they do a lot worse stuff. At that point, extend our argument specifically. First, on the moral hazard argument, they have a few responses. First, they say the Edelman evidence. When they concede the Edelman evidence is about borrowing large amounts, not student debt cancellation. Our evidence explains that for every $1 in subsidized student debt cancellation, you increase college tuition by 60 cents. The second problem is that they say it doesn't cause a recession, but the eighth conceded our evidence that number one, it's inflation that will cause a recession, and number two, our evidence explains because the economy is uniquely vulnerable right now, even a moderate shock will cause a recession. At that point, extend our argument that because colleges recognize that they can increase tuition because the government will pay the amount, you see increase tuition prices, and our evidence from the other link says that that treasury bonds would actually be created, which would increase inflation, causing the recession that we talked about. Even if you want to vote on their framing, they conceded the CRS evidence, which explains that the debt levels will skyrocket back by 2028. This is terminal defense to their case, and it's reasons to vote for us because they are perpetuating more racist systems. Even if they're solving for one generation, our argument is that the colleges increasing tuitions will affect everyone for future generations and future students. They've also conceded the fact that since the debt increases by 2028, they're literally not solving for the racist system in the first place. But the argument that we're going to go for is that temporal free riding. Our argument from Farquhar explains that future generations are the most underrepresented in policymaking spheres. This is why, when you vote for that, you're actually perpetuating a system of racism because you're not considering future generations in the first place. That's why we tell you when you focus on structural violence, you're ignoring macroeconomic and future generations, which is inherently abusive and racist in itself. It's not inclusive. Okay, big picture. We are winning a better link into structural violence. They're solving for one generation. We've literally told you why they're not solving for long-term change, and extinction comes first.